Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Thank you very much for joining Chicago Wilderness Congress Session 3. We're looking forward to a really great presentation today. A few more people are joining us, so we'll give them a few more minutes, just a minute or two to get on. But while we're doing that, I wanted to just walk through some of the guidelines that we have established for today. Your mic and your video will be turned off, and we're going to use the question and answer function. If you can see, it says Q&A. It's a little box. It looks like a dialog box there on the bottom. And so type any questions that you have into that box, and our panelists and moderators will do their best to answer all of the questions that come into that box, either live or through a message in that question and answer function. You can use your reactions, thumbs up, clap, thumbs down. If you have a technical issue, like you can't hear or something's interfering with your reception for the webinar, we will use the chat box for that. And we have one of our team members managing the questions that come into the chat box. And we're recording this webinar, and we'll put this information live on our website as soon as we get the information compiled. So let's see, we're up to about 33. Let's give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right. Thanks again for coming. My name's Laura Riley, and I'm the coordinator of Chicago Wilderness. And you can see the guidelines for our webinar conversation today. And you can read through those. Use the Q&A function for your questions. I want to thank you all for being in Congress 2020. Obviously, it's a different format than we envisioned. And we're really pleased to be able to do this virtually, and hope that we're able to bring the great content that we had envisioned live to you through your computer. I want to thank our sponsors for their generous support of this event, and we're really grateful for their support. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Slattery from the Forest Preserve of Cook County.
Hello, can you see me? Or can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. I just want to thank Laura and Lydia Euler and Sherry Fisher too for their amazing work keeping this Chicago Wilderness 2020 Congress alive through this webinar series. It's been a lot of work, and just want to make sure that we're thanking them too. So I'm Chris Slattery, Director of Planning and Development for the Cook County Forest Preserves. I wore an official shirt to help you remember if you can see it. So I'm pleased to share with you some highlights from the Cook County Forest Preserve's most recent land acquisition plan. I'm going to start out with some brief background on why we did the plan and how it relates to other big vision plans. And then Emmy Brawley from the Conservation Fund, National Nonprofit Conservation Organization, and others that were on the consultant team from Rudd Resources, a Chicago-based communications consultant firm, and the Metropolitan Planning Council that really needs no explanation or introduction. They're going to tell you about some of the innovative aspects of the plan. And then finally, my colleague Chip O'Leary, who's our Deputy Director of Resource Management, is going to wrap up with next steps on implementing the plan. Okay, so next slide. So why did we do this plan? Really, first and foremost, to advance other big vision plans. So this is a strategic plan, a smaller plan, but big vision plans are really critical to finding partners and funding. So on the left, you see Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan, obviously a big vision plan, really more of a painting than a science-based plan. And then our own 2000, the first public acquisition map that we released to the public in the year 2000, almost 100 years after that, on the right. But they're really showing, in a very unscientific way, connections, a green belt around the city of Chicago, and forest preserves to connect rivers, streams, urban boulevards, larger city parks, and the lakefront park system. So we have about 70,000 acres today. Most of that was acquired in the first 15 years after the forest preserve was established, and then again in the 1960s when there was a lot of public funding. All of that was done without any public plan. But in the 1970s, when, ironically, around the time of the first Earth Day, the pace slowed considerably because of suburban development pressure and declining public funding. So the first public land acquisition plan, and the map on the right was released after that, was under Richard Phelan, and there was a sense of urgency to save the best of what was left, especially unprotected natural area inventory sites, and before those were lost, and the hope was that a public plan would catalyze support for increased public funding. Next. So, and then of course, Chicago Wilderness released its big vision, the Green Infrastructure Vision Map in 2004, and showing a much wider wilderness encompassing a region that today has over 500,000 acres already protected. So as you know, this map and this vision is based on science and GIS data. So, and its primary focus is on protecting natural sites, sites that protect habitat, and larger parcels and connections with characteristics that support biodiversity. Next. So in 2012, Chicago Wilderness released GIV 2.0, and that was instrumental in the Cook County Forest Preserve's 2012 land acquisition plan, which identified roughly 21,000 acres of opportunity areas that also, in addition to bigger tracts and connections, included some smaller parcels under 100 acres and sites that have relatively low ecological value now, but that have potential for restoration. So you can see on the right, this southeast part of Cook County has a lot of pink. Those are the opportunity areas, but even that amount of land is more than we knew that we could afford in the near future, and we would need to prioritize. So most of it was agricultural open space with relatively low current ecological value, and we knew that prioritizing basically on, primarily on ecological values wasn't going to be effective. So that's why we hired the Conservation Fund and their team to help us develop a new evaluation and prioritization process to consider other goals and benefits as well, including health and social equity and climate resiliency. Next. So, and then in 2014, just 2 years later, we had another big vision plan released by a committee of civic leaders, which we now know as our Conservation and Policy Council. And they urged the adoption of another Burnham-like vision to increase our holdings from 69,000 acres to 90,000 acres in the next 25 years. by basically focusing on all of the 21,000 acres that were identified in the 2012 land acquisition plan. So a practical reason for why we did this Southeast plan was to focus on an area where we could get the most bang for our buck and make progress in achieving this very ambitious goal. So, but the goals of the Next Century Conservation Plan are not only to protect ecologically important land under threat of irreversible loss, but also to protect land to connect new audiences. Next. So Cook County is the most diverse county in Illinois. And as an agency in that county, we work hard to welcome everyone in the preserves. But we also recognize that people of color often feel unwelcome and unsafe in natural outdoor places. An unfortunate incident 2 years ago was a wake-up call. A Forest Preserve police officer failed to protect a young woman during a racist incident. But our leaders, Arnold Randall, Tony Preckwinkle, Eileen Fiegel, took this all very seriously. We realized there was more work to do. So 2 years ago, we formed a Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, READY Committee, and to identify new strategies to overcome systemic racism. And last year, we hired experts in racial bias training to begin hard work of getting all of our employees and volunteers to make sure that we are welcoming all residents. Last month, our Conservation and Policy Council approved a new policy paper that urges increased focus on impacted communities based on maps generated by CMAP. And it's not surprising that Southeast Cook County has quite a few of these impacted communities, and it's another reason for targeting this area. Next. So here's a map of Southeast Cook County, the focus area for our plan. And on the right is the only map in the plan. So all of the GIS data is aggregated into something that looks more like a Burnham plan, a greater level of vision to excite people. So to recap why we did the plan, to advance big vision plans like Daniel Burnham's and Chicago Wilderness's and our own Next Century Conservation Plan, which are all essential to building support and finding partners, which we need. And second, to focus on an area of the county where we could get the most bang for our buck. And finally, to advance other goals and policies relating to public health and racial equity that will be important in attracting support as we move forward. So you can find this plan on the Forest Preserve website at fpdcc.com by searching for land acquisition plan. You can find our 2012 plan there as well. So I'll now turn it over to Emmy and her team to give you more details on the innovative aspects of the plan.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Emmy Brawley with the Conservation Fund. I'm an associate director for the Midwest, based here in Chicago. The Conservation Fund served as project lead, so I'm going to give you a brief high-level overview of our methodology, and then kick it over to Chloe and Sonia to talk in more detail about the community engagement and the health and racial equity impact review work. So first, I do want to thank the great team, including not only the fund, MPC, and Red Resources, but also Curtis Wittick from Antero Group, and then also thank the Donnelly Foundation for their supplemental support, grant support of this project. So thanks. Next slide. So this is our plan methodology. We had multiple different elements, but it was not a linear process. There was a lot of parallel work and iterative feedback that I think created a lot of richness to the work. The overall goal was to generate a framework that integrated land conservation with economic development. So we really wanted to see a plan that had room for both. We cast a really wide net on the data inventory and local and regional plan review to make sure that our end product was not targeting sites for conservation that were otherwise critical priorities for local communities around economic development. Next slide. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the suitability analysis. For this element, we took all of the other elements, the data, the community engagement, the research, and put it into a GIS-based model to help us answer the question, what is the relative suitability of each parcel within the planning area to meet the forest preserve goals? Next slide. We were fortunate to have Will Allen from the Fund's North Carolina office on our team. He's just written a book on using cost-effective ways to prioritize conservation projects. So we adopted the logic scoring of preference model, or LSP. Next slide. And through that process, we were able to analyze over 80,000 parcels within the planning area. To do this, we selected 5 scenarios to differentiate parcels on their potential to fill a particular goal. So ecological value was one scenario, equity was another scenario. Each scenario got its own data set, and then we weighted the data to reflect the forest preserve priorities as well as what we were hearing from communities. Then each scenario got its own map. And then we put all 5 maps together to create one composite map, and it showed for each parcel whether it met 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 scenarios. In the end, there were just shy of 5,500 acres that met all 5 scenarios. And if you want to geek out on the GIS stuff, Will is presenting on August 7th at MPC on just the GIS framework. Next slide. Once we completed the feasibility analysis, the suitability analysis, we went into a feasibility assessment, which is essentially ground truthing the data with a goal to elevate the highest potential sites and then provide kind of a shovel-ready implementation roadmap for the forest preserves. Next slide, please. So here's an example of how it looks. On the far left is just the raw data, and then we move into a scenario map, and that moves into a parcel-specific feasibility work, and then ultimately into a illustrated public-facing vision. Next slide, please. To end, I just want to highlight 3 other elements of the plan that I think are unique. First, we did work with Bruce Bondi on illustrations using a charrette process of the full project team. So we all sat around a table and said, what does everything that we've learned and everything that we've heard, what does that look like? And the result was these illustrations. Another unique element was that we included a section articulating the benefits of the plan for all of Cook County, not just for the forest preserves. We felt it was really important that everyone be able to see themselves as part of this vision. And then finally, we identified in the plan some broad categories of partnership and leverage, recognizing that in a time of really limited acquisition funding, that creative partnerships were going to be essential to implementation. So that's a high-level overview of some of the elements, and I'll turn it over to Sonia to talk in more depth about the community engagement piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. I'm Sonia Lewis, and I am with Rudd Resources. Rudd Resources is a communications agency on the south side of Chicago. We specialize in public relations and community relations and strategies. So it was a pleasure for us to work with the team on this exciting project. Next slide. Our purpose from a communication standpoint as we got involved with the project was really to get a perspective on the community's values and their needs related to parks and open space in the natural areas that the Forest Preserve was considering. So we wanted to we took a very holistic approach in terms of being able to talk with everyone, several different stakeholders or groups of stakeholders from the target areas. And one portion of it is that this was a long-term project. So as part of our interview process, we had to make it clear to all of our interviewees and those involved that this was an opportunity for them to envision what their communities could look like 10 to 20 years from now. There wasn't any immediate plans to make changes. So we wanted to make sure that they were able to take a clear canvas and really focus on where we could go from where we are now to 10 to 20 years from now. And then there was a big focus on the impact of the land and how it was being used in the area, and really setting forth some long-term and thinking about long-term goals for the region. Next slide, please. So with our interview selection process, what we wanted to do is we had a very targeted category. And so we wanted to talk to subject matter experts, whether that was for habitat, trails, anything that intersected with these parcels of land and with these municipalities that we were focused on. So we made a list as a group. We came up with a list of subject matter experts. Then we also wanted to have a list of civic leadership, and that was from anyone from mayors, elected officials, and then also people that are working with the municipalities that were very well versed and involved on a daily basis in what was going on in their focus areas that would have an impact on the work that we were focusing on. And we also wanted to talk to residents, of course, because they were impacted directly, because these are the areas that they either lived in or they worked in or they played in. So we definitely wanted to get their perspectives. And what we started off as our starting point is we came up with different personas that we wanted to fit into all of these categories. So in each of them, we looked at different community leaders, we looked at public officials. And as you know, on the south end, the south suburbs, that's a predominantly African-American community, low to middle income. And we wanted to make sure that we were looking at residents who had been there for a while, looking at some of the younger residents that were raising children in the area, and also educators and different business owners who were a part of the community as their businesses and their work. And of course, we wanted to get a sampling of all of the folks who enjoy outdoors, those enthusiasts, those who enjoy it recreationally, those who enjoy it on a daily basis, and also those who are identified as forest preserve users. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure as we were developing our list of interviewees, we did what we like to call our snowball sampling. And each person that we came in contact with, we always asked the question if they could identify other organizations, or if they can identify other people that would be able to give us a perspective to the work that we were doing. One of the other things that we wanted to do, just based on the time frame that we had, we wanted to get in front of a large group of people to get their input as a part of a focus group. So what we did is we identified different events that were happening during our time frame in those areas that attracted large groups of stakeholders, so that we didn't have to actually plan a meeting and then rely on us bringing folks and getting the attendance up for those meetings. But we were able to be a part of something that they were accustomed to attending, something they were familiar with, and also by establishing the relationship with the event organizers, that gave us instant credibility in terms of our outreach to the people that we wanted to talk with. Next slide, please. So the types of interviews, we did 3 types of interviews. We did one-on-one conversations with subject matter experts, and those were basically executed by both Emmy and myself. And so we talked to everybody from public health, as Chloe would talk about in a bit about the public health and equity perspective of this project. But we talked to these subject matter experts, and we did this in person, we did this over the phone, and really had a lot of open-ended questions so that they could actually help to educate us in terms of what was currently happening in the focus area, and then also to fill us in on plans that they had in terms of this focus area. And that was very informative for us, so that we had a very good collection of what was currently happening and what was being planned in the areas that we were looking at. And another important piece that came from our subject matter experts was the historical perspective, which was extremely important for us to have a in-depth understanding of what was happening in the focus area. And as I mentioned, we were looking for a presentation that we can do at a regularly scheduled meeting. And so we were given the opportunity to work with the South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association at their monthly meeting. And it included civic leaders from all of the different municipalities and villages that we were focused on. And then we partnered with Fort Heights. They were doing coffees with the mayor. And so we were a part of one of their evening meetings that attracted a lot of residents, also some of the potential business owners, some of the business owners in the area, and also potential economic developers who were attending the meetings to give presentation to this group as well. So it was a very diverse group that we were able to actually sit down and have a focus group with them, and it was very enlightening as well. Next slide, please. So here with our subject matter experts, I just wanted to give you all an overview. As we started to build our list, we came up with several different categories that intersected with this project in terms of their day-to-day responsibilities, everything from culture to stormwater, transportation, utility. We talked to ComEd and some of their officials. We talked to the Army Corps. So we really had an opportunity to get in-depth learning from all of these subject matter experts on the different facets of the project that we had to pull together and that had to be considered in terms of next steps for the project. Next, please. And so in terms of our focus groups with our civic leadership, as I mentioned, we were there that evening and we were introduced, and we were able to make a presentation to this audience, which was a very influential audience here. And one of the best things about the focus group was we were also able to talk one-on-one after the meeting and really get some input. And again, as part of our snowballing, we were introduced to the different municipality leaders, and there was also an opportunity for us to ask them for input as we continue to build our outreach list. And it also gave us an introduction to a lot of the people that we would be calling on during our subject matter expert phone calls, to be able to say that we met you at this meeting and to use that as a springboard for our conversations. So these are some of the organizations that we work with that encompasses all of the focus area. All of the villages were involved. Next, please. And so with our focus group that we did with the coffee with the mayor, we wanted to make sure that we had some forest preserve users there so that they can give us their perspective in terms of how they currently use the forest preserves. But we also wanted to talk to parents and guardians and grandparents and people who had been in the neighborhood for a long period of time, so that they could help us to understand what some of the transition that had happened and transformations that had happened in their communities over the years and their perspectives on that. As I mentioned, we had the health and equity section of the project. So we wanted to make sure that we had public health practitioners and public health safety representatives that were involved in it as well. And we wanted to, as I mentioned, this is a project that we were looking into the future in the next 10 to 20 years. And so we wanted to get input from those who would be a part of that future and being able to get their input. So we also made sure to include youth and young adults in our focus groups. Next slide, please. Excuse me. As we wanted to level set us when we were talking to all of our different subject matter experts in our groups, we wanted to give them some perspective in terms of the benefits of green space. And so we were able to share with them different things that you think about. You know, we all know the benefits of green space and clean air, but a lot of people weren't aware of how green space supports mental health and how it also, it actually, the impact that it plays on our natural and cultural history. And also some of the benefits of green spaces that we talked about with our businesses when we met with them is that a lot of businesses, they give higher preferences to areas that offer plants and green space, and that's something that they're looking for. And that there's just people, consumers are actually attracted to businesses that have a lot of green space and trees and plants and shrubbery. So we were able to use this information to level set and to be able to get everybody in agreement in terms of what some of these benefits were, and gave them some aha moments in terms of some of the things that they may not have thought about before. And of course, we wanted to focus on the economic activity. So as you can see, we also shared information about local parks and recreation agencies and the income that they generate. So that gave us an opportunity to make sure that we were all on the same page in terms of what we were going to talk about before we got started. Next slide, please. And since we were dealing with civic leadership, we were dealing with residents, we were dealing with business owners, we wanted to make sure in all of our presentations and conversations that we had a glossary of terms that we can agree on, so that when we were talking about forest preserves, that everyone was clear of what the public land set aside was that, and to be able to identify forest preserves properties in their area so that they could understand what we were talking about. And we also focused on their community. So they would understand when answering the questions that we had, what we had in mind in terms of their geographic area, just to focus on where they lived, where they worked or they played, and their answers would be suited from that perspective. And so we wanted to make sure that when we talked about health, that they knew we were talking about that from a holistic standpoint, from physical to social well-being. And also equity. Equity means has different definitions with different people. So we wanted to make sure that we level set that definition as well in terms of fair opportunities and access, not dependent on one's racial or economic status, since several other questions were focused on that. All right, next. This just gives you, we had a couple of different categories of that we used in terms of land use, and then also the socioeconomic impact. I also mentioned that we had a lot of open-ended questions so that we would allow our interviewees to share information that we may not have thought of, that may not have been on the question list, but to give them an opportunity to do that. And then also the envisioning activity, which was a lot of fun because we gave people an opportunity to look into the future and really paint a picture of their neighborhood that they wanted to see. Next slide, please. So here are just some of the questions, and those will be included just to give you an idea of the types of questions that we answered and how we set those up about the land use. And if you go to the next slide, the focus was on the socioeconomic and really looking at input from Chloe that she was able to provide us about the health and equity from an economic development, employment, and public health and recreation standpoint. And so our last slide set of questions is what we actually, some of the questions that we asked our subject matter experts to really drill down on their areas of expertise and the businesses, that things that they knew about, which was very helpful for us in terms of learning part of their jobs, what they were forecasting for their different organizations. So that helped us a lot in terms of looking forward. Next slide, please. And just in terms of wrap up, as I mentioned, our final question that we used with the residents particularly was for them to actually give us 2 to 3 recommendations in terms of how they felt the open space could be used 10 to 20 years from now. So thinking of themselves as visionaries and really giving them an opportunity to feel like as a part of this, of their community and what was happening and what was developing. So the community engagement was very critical piece to that, to make sure that all of our stakeholders felt an involvement to having their voices heard. Next slide. And these are just some of the key takeaways that all the forest preserves as a common denominator with all of the different areas that we focused on. They really had a positive view of the forest preserves, and the developers really looked at the open space as a benefit and a value from their environmental protection and expanding their businesses. As I talked about, the residents were, although they weren't aware of all of the different benefits through conversation, it was clear that they valued that very highly. And then also the villages, just in terms of that lacking in that corridor, a lot of them lack funding and resources to address a lot of the improvements that we talked about. And it really opened up an opportunity to see how the forest preserves could collaborate with these organizations and be a part of the growth in the areas. So now I'm going to pass it over to Chloe to talk more in depth about the health and racial equity impact. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chloe Guerin-Sands. I'm the manager of health equity and planning at the Metropolitan Planning Council. So we really thought that it was important, given all of the context that you just heard, to make sure that we're incorporating a racial equity impact review and a health equity impact review into this process and into our prioritization. So I'm going to tell you about the process that we used and what we found throughout that process. So next. So the health impact review, the steps that we used for that were first, of course, going and looking at what the existing health conditions were in our focus area. We then reviewed hospital community health needs assessments. So hospitals under the Affordable Care Act are required every few years to do an assessment of the service area and the communities that they serve to really understand what the priority needs are for those areas. So we went through the community health needs reports from 2 of the hospitals in the area to make sure that what we were looking at aligned with what community needs and input are. The next we included questions about health in the outreach and focus groups, which Sonia covered. And then we did research on what the health benefits of open space and land acquisition are, as well as what any potential unintended consequences would be. And then we included the social vulnerability index, which I'll talk about more, as the quantitative piece in our model. So next. For the racial impact review, we did a really similar process. So we just asked questions about it, looked at the existing demographics, again, did research about the impact of open space and land acquisition on racial equity, and then included that social vulnerability index in our model. Next. So when we looked at the focus area, the existing economic and racial demographics that are in the area, I'll tell you overall what this means. So in our focus area, we have about a $21,000 per capita income compared with Cook County overall being around $33,700. And in our focus area, it's about 66% Black for demographics, and Cook County as a whole is about 23% Black. So that just gives you an idea that the area that we're dealing with overall in this is a more economically disadvantaged, more racially marginalized group as compared to the rest of the county. And this information is from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning's community data snapshots. So that's a really great resource for planners to understand both municipalities as well as Chicago community areas and what their current status is for a lot of different demographic data. Next. So then we looked at, again, those hospital community health needs assessments. On the right, we looked at Franciscan Health St. James and Ingalls Memorial Hospital in their most recent reports. And we saw that, you know, what's listed here around a lot around physical activity, heart disease, nutrition, those were really what came out as the most important priorities for those hospitals and the communities that they serve. For us as a project team, the indicators that we looked at are on the left. We looked at obesity, asthma, diabetes, hypertension, and depression, because we felt that these really are the most related to, again, physical activity, being able to get out into green space. These are going to be most related to those land use elements. And so again, what we find with the focus area compared to Cook County for obesity, diabetes, and hypertension in particular, our range that our focus area sees goes much higher than Cook County overall. And so we're seeing a population that is dealing with some poorer health outcomes than the rest of the county. So next. So the social vulnerability index, once we went through and looked at some of these more qualitative areas, we really wanted to make sure that we were quantifying what some of these health and equity impacts look like. And one of the measures that we found is the social vulnerability index, which is compiled by the CDC at the census tract level. And so, as you can see here, it includes information around socioeconomic status, household composition, minority status and language, and housing type and transportation. So we know that economics and poverty and all of these different outcomes that are listed as part of this index really are underlying factors that really affect health, right? So these measures of equity and social, social status really are what affect people's health in the long term. And so we used this measure and this index as a proxy for both health and racial inequities in our actual quantitative model. And so we just included the full index and then weighted it, and that was what our equity scenario was. And it's also important to note that each one of these subscales, indices that are in different colors can be pulled out and used as their own but we used the model as a whole, the index as a whole. So next. So this is the portion that we really wanted to understand, when we are recommending that the Forest Preserves acquires this land and moves it into, formal managed space, what are the benefits going to be to the communities that live near these? And are there any unintended consequences for implementing this vision? So we know that, as Sonia mentioned, that improving physical and mental health, improving climate resilience, and increasing economic development around the area are three really big benefits. I want to pull out what I find are two really important pieces of this and really interesting pieces of this. One is around the health benefits, especially around physical activity, and both for mental health and physical health, there are studies showing that physical activity, when it's done in a green space, is even more effective at reducing some of those poor health outcomes than just doing physical activity on, in a gym or on a street that doesn't have any greenery around it. So that was really important for us. Second, I really want to note that the quality and the formality of the space is also a really important consideration, and that there's actually research that we found showing that as far as people using the space, as far as the benefits of the space and people feeling safe in the space, that formal land and managed land is much better at helping people do that than just a vacant green space. So in the literature, as far as equity, it shows that at times in certain areas, people of color and lower income people actually might live closer to more green space, but that the quality of that green space tends to be much poorer. And so for us, in terms of the unintended consequences, we really wanted to make sure that this was going to be a plan for both acquiring the land and then making sure that we have the resources to manage that land and keep it nice over time, so that we're not just creating, another resource that's not maintained that the community doesn't feel good about. And then Chris mentioned policing in green spaces, so making sure that we're not perpetuating, kind of the feelings of unsafety that a lot of people of color have in these spaces. And then displacement always comes up when we talk about the economic development benefits for this focus area. Because of the long history of disinvestment and where it's at currently, displacement was not one of the fears that we heard from the community when we talked about this. So next. So how did the inclusion of equity affect our final prioritization results? I have a series of maps that will tell you the answer. So the first one is in holdings. This is what it would look like if we only prioritize the land that's already adjacent to what the Forest Reserves already owns. Next is equity. So you can see how that is just markedly different and really making areas pop that wouldn't necessarily normally be considered. And then you can just quickly go through the next few. Flood mitigation, yep. And then this is our composite, the final one that turned into that map. Yep, you can go to takeaways. So our key takeaways, as you can see from the maps, incorporating equity and health measures substantially changes the final results of that prioritization model. So it's really important to include that community outreach to help us understand how criteria should be weighted and what elements are most important when considering land acquisition. Using that final composite score that Emmy talked about helps us create a balanced picture that takes all of these priority considerations into account. And then agencies that are committed to deep community engagement, like the Forest Reserves, need to make sure that they're planning a budget for it accordingly, which in this case, the Forest Reserves did. So it's really important to just plan ahead for how expensive true community engagement can be. And that is it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Chip at the Forest Reserves.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Chloe. I think what I want to talk to you about next is what is next? How do we take this really deep, detailed plan and move it into the initial phases of implementing, and what do we do with it? Next slide, please. Okay, next one after that, please, too. Thank you. So specifically, how do we identify properties? Sorry, if we go back one, please. How do we identify properties for acquisition and also ensure that they meet our conservation goals and our community goals? And how do we do that compatibly, and how do we do that economically? Next slide. As you heard from our prior speakers, this plan presents a different approach to preserve planning and acquisition than our standard forest preserve approach. In past preserve design and acquisition projects, the forest preserve assesses properties for three main values: their ecological value, their ability to link or expand preserves, and their potential usefulness for public activities or amenities such as picnic groves, golf, and event planning. However, I put up a slide here of an example of one of those criteria that we use. This is our standard way of ranking properties in this slide here. So this is a configuration assessment. So we take a look at our properties to see if they're standalones adjacent to an FBC's property or a public, another public ownership. Are there accessible routes for visitors? Is it in a priority zone, etc.? Next slide. And then we look at our planning and resource assessment criteria, which would include things like recreational potential, zoning concerns, compatibility, ecological value, wildlife features, rare species, water resources, etc. However, in this region and looking at the properties that we're looking at, there may not be a whole lot of variation in a lot of these criteria. They may, in fact, all end up ranking out pretty close to the same. Next slide, please. So that's where this Southeast plan comes in, because they used a new set of metrics, and it has created a new opportunity for us to look at new criteria to prioritize property, things like flood management, equity and health, connectivity, adjacency, and ecological value as well. We have a much broader scope of opportunities for acquisition. These criteria, excuse me, as you can see from the composite slide here that Chloe had showed earlier, we can layer these criteria on top of each other. And so you can very quickly pick up where our critical properties are for achieving our goals. And it's done in a very clever way here with the darker the shade of purple, the more criteria that property meets. Next slide, please. Okay. Excuse me. So starting out on this is going to be the hardest part for us. And we may do a little bit of using our prior criteria, but we're going to be relying pretty heavily on these new criteria. And as time goes on, as we get ourselves moving, we'll be relying almost exclusively on these new criteria. That's how we'll be looking at properties moving forward. And outside of looking at the mechanics of prioritizing these properties, the plan also sets out for us alternative considerations and strategies. Our standard means of acquiring property is usually through fee site acquisition, that is approaching a landowner and buying that property using our own internal funds or grants. Because the model here doesn't rely strictly on ecological value and our goals are much more community oriented, there are many more options. An important first step is building relationships and contacts that were established by the team that put this plan together. Devising strategies and finding overlap with local communities will require building relationships. That means outreach and conversations with municipalities and other local and regional planners and community leaders to learn about their plans. In particular, wherever possible, we'll be looking to align our preserve design with existing economic plans, and that will help us make key connections while ensuring we can meet our goals at the same time. Looking for overlap of goals and plans will be a key strategy to make this project go. This plan also opens up opportunities for alternative funding mechanisms. So some of those include wetland banking, agricultural management, permitting agency partnerships, and water and carbon credits. Next slide, please. Will also allow us to have to reach out and find new partnerships that we typically don't work with. It'll be critical to achieving our goals. There's a few examples on the slide, working with MWRD in terms of stormwater synergy. So where do they have needs? Where do we have needs? Conservation partnerships. And as the bottom it says easements, do we have partners who hold easements? Do we have opportunities to allow other mechanisms besides fee simply owning property to work for us? And then looking at partnerships with federal agencies that regulate wetland impacts would be another example of that. Okay, next slide. With that in mind, we're looking at, obviously we want outcomes. We don't want just a plan and a process. We want outcomes. And our expectation is that we'll be able to use this plan to create new opportunities to protect the water resources of the region, provide new opportunities for our constituents to recreate and experience nature, as well as doing good, solid conservation, which is our bread and butter as an organization. I wanted to say a quick thank you to our partners who created this plan: Conservation Fund, Metropolitan Planning Council, Intero Group, and Rudd Resources especially. And I think at this point, we'll take questions. Thank you.
So I don't see any questions in the chat. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in. Also, next slide, please. Our contact information is on the screen. You're welcome to email any of us with specific questions about what we presented. And I think we have one question coming in. Is water quality part of this plan? So we generated the flooding scenario, flooding and stormwater scenario, looking at flooding challenges, but we didn't actually include water quality in the GIS. But Chloe is going to answer this live as well. Chloe, do you want to step up?
About the water quality?
Yes.
Ooh, Justin would have to kind of answer
Okay.
that.
I can just say that we what we did was recognize the partnership opportunities available through things like MWRD's current stormwater management planning process. So we definitely highlighted opportunities for creative partnerships there. Did you have another question you wanted to answer, Chloe? No.
Oh, no, I was just saying that that one was answered.
Got it. What funding levels are identified in current budgets for land management? That's probably a question for the forest preserves. And I think that's probably the end of our time too. Chris and Chip, do you want to talk about budgeting for land acquisition?
Yeah, this is Chris, and I'll just tell you that funding is always a challenge. But we have been fortunate to be competitive for grants that have come up already. So we've already been awarded one state grant through the Land and Water Conservation Fund to begin acquisition at the north end of Dirt Deer Creek and are just in the process of submitting. I think we just did submit an application for second grant. You know, we're in early discussions with funding partners like MWRD about low cost acquisitions that could come through that agency, through their buyout programs that they're considering. So it's going to take us some time, decades, you know, and we're continuing to look for additional partners, and the Conservation Fund certainly has been an important partner in helping us think about creative new ways to implement, like the storm store. We're going to do our best to stretch the limited money we have, which is less than $10 million, and make it go as far as we can until we're able to get additional major resources, hopefully someday through a referenda. So thank you all for participating. I don't know if there were any other questions that I can turn over to anybody else, but we really appreciate your interest in, and for some of you, I'm sure we'll be in touch with you to talk about future implementation ideas. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
My fellow panelists, feel free to turn on your videos. Y'all are leaving me out in the cold right now. Thank you, Deborah. You don't abandon me. And Jonathan too. You know, I know we're all virtual, but still kind of feels like you're in front of an audience. Because we are. Thanks to everyone who stuck around from the first session, and thank you to those presenters for a wonderful job. It's really fascinating to learn about all of the complexities of that research and that data. Our presentation is going to be very different, namely because our group will not be doing, you know, a formal presentation, so to speak. We'll be having a conversation centered on the importance of partnerships for successful environmental education opportunities for youth. And also just our own perspectives on the community engagement and partnership process, what nature organizations can do to be more accessible to community organizations, as well as, you know, how we as members of very different organizations navigate these complex relationships. I'm gonna start, I think about 2:05, just in case some other folks are gonna sign on a little late. But I'm excited to have everyone with me, even if we can't be together in person like we had originally thought. And similar to the last presentation, feel free to drop any questions throughout our conversation in the Q&A. We'll be answering at the end. We'll turn to audience questions at the end of our discussion.
Nice to see you, Danny.
Nice to see you too. You look lovely as always.
It must be the hair.
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal out there today.
We're just blessed to have sunshine rather than snow.
Amen. It is a gorgeous day out, regardless of the heat. Well, let's get started then. I could sit and chat with any of these folks forever and have a wonderful time, but I'll start by introducing them to everybody so you can get to know our panelists as well. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order to be fair. So part of our panelists today, we have Deborah Williams. Deborah is the Community Engagement Specialist for the Nature Conservancy at Indian Boundary Prairies in Markham, Illinois. She also works to connect the community with this incredible natural asset, and she also oversees the Youth Environmental Thinkers internship program, which is an incredible paid internship opportunity for high school students that connects them to different aspects of the environmental field, as well as engages them in different nature approaches. And I'm sure I'll let Deborah talk about that program more because I don't want to misrepresent it, but they do amazing things. I also have with me Jonathan Arenas. Jonathan is a counselor with this is a bit of a mouthful, Lake County Public Health Department's Child and Adolescent Behavioral Services Group, CABS for short. The CABS program goes beyond just offering counseling services for youth. They also run a summer group that in normal seasons would take students on outings, get them exposed to different fun and educational opportunities. And they're doing a virtual version of this summer as well. And finally, I have Kimberly Waller, or Miss Monarch, if you want to call her by her nature name, who runs the Cool Learning Experience program based out of First Baptist Church in Waukegan. And CLE for short is a summer learning program that provides fantastic education in ecology, arts, community building, social emotional learning, and also provides holiday programming for children as well when their schools are off. And so our session, as I mentioned, is rooted in the idea that we know the health of our children is deeply connected to the health of our ecosystems and the access these children have to those ecosystems and the safe access they have. And we also all represent, as I mentioned, pretty diverse organizations, from a government agency to a nonprofit or an independent child care provider. We have very mixed experiences navigating these systems, but we all have one thing in common in that we rely on community partnerships to help bolster our programming. So to get everyone started, I want to pose a question. Oh, I guess I'll also go really quick. Again, any questions you have during the presentation, please leave in the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end after our discussion. And if you could specify who on the panel your question is for, that would help greatly. As you can see, everyone's names are on their screens as well. Your mic and video will be turned off during our presentation. Feel free to use the reactions through Zoom to cheer us on, or I guess boo us out if you don't like what we're saying, but you'll be muted either way. And then if you have any technical issues, that's what you should use the chat feature for. And this session's content will be posted on the Chicago Wilderness website. Go to the next slide. Well, I guess I'll start just with our first question, which is, I'd like our panelists to kind of go over how access to nature impacts the community that you work with. I guess I'll start with Deborah because you're the first one on my screen.
I probably should have been the last one because my whole approach is so much more people-oriented. It's connecting people to people and people to nature. And I find that in the position that I have the wonderful opportunity to serve in, and being out here in Markham, Illinois, which is the prairie capital of the Prairie State, where we have the 5 prairies, the opportunity to value both equitably and approach it in that manner is the foundation on which I stand. Because the Conservancy has been doing work here in Markham with these prairies since the 60s. But there are people out here who have been living out here for over 40 years. And I say, have you heard about the Indian Boundary Prairies? And it's like, no. You have this open space that everybody sees, but the connection is not there. And I don't blame the people in terms of not having interest or any of that. It's the valuing of both the people and the nature, and seeing the coexistent nature of the two and valuing both. So having access to green space is wonderful, but I also think having access to people is wonderful. And so how to bridge that is the direction that I go in. And it's a challenge. For a variety of reasons, it's a challenge, because we know historically there are factors that have contributed to the disconnect, and that is a hurdle that first needs to be identified, and then to deal with how to jump the hurdle. So yes, both people and nature are important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you've perfectly set up, not just about how access to nature impacts our communities, but beyond that, what our communities are actually doing within itself. What is our people access like? And that in turn impacts our nature as well. It's also interconnected. It's impossible to talk about one thing and ignore the human side. We get caught up in that a lot, nature organizations especially, talking about the nature component and forgetting that there is no nature without people. Nature needs people as much as we need nature, right?
So unfortunately, it is possible to have the conversation and not include people.
Very possible, a very unfortunate possibility, absolutely. I also just realized I didn't introduce myself. So really quickly, I'm Danny Aboud. I am the Manager of Community Programs and Partnerships for the Brushwood Center at Ryerson Woods. We're located in the Ryerson Woods Forest Preserve and Riverwoods. We have the blessing to be able to partner with all of the folks you see on the screen today to carry out various different conversations, programs. We focus on creating accessible nature and art programming for communities throughout Lake County and Cook County. I'm going to, sorry for that interjection, but I'm going to jump to Jonathan really quick. Jonathan, do you want to touch on nature impact and the clients you serve?
Yeah, so we typically serve all the Lake County population. So to say that access to nature, we have a lot of options with the help of nature preserves and the community that we serve. And I'm trying to answer the question without jumping to other questions, but the concern is more the fact of utilizing the space that we do have. Like I said, Lake County is very fortunate to have a lot of nature. As you see, my backyard has lots of nature in it. But it's being able to, yes, it's accessible, but how do we utilize what is in front of us?
Absolutely.
And then, like I said, I'll go on to the next question, sorry.
That's okay. That is very okay. Ms. Monarch, do you want to chime in as well on nature impact in the community in Waukegan?
Sure. I would say that our access to nature, our parents, many of our parents do, all of our children in particular, that over the years have enjoyed the parks, the local parks. We have ravines, and of course we're like walking distance from the greatest natural resource in this area being Lake Michigan. Well, natural resource, the greatest human resource are our children. So there is connections. Unfortunately, our challenge, of course, with transportation, if you don't have a car, it's a really long walk to Lake Michigan. It can be done, but it's not when it's hot outside. They do camping. They do campfire night at with Lake County Forest Preserve. They go to Greenbelt. They, local parks. So I would say that they have, many of our children have a robust relationship with nature, maybe not as frequent as we would like, but then that's one reason why we have our program, is because once a week, every Friday, the children go to Lake Michigan to just, enjoy, relax, and play in the water. Unfortunately, it may not happen this summer, but normally that's what we do for the 8-week duration of the program, along with, going to Brushwood and other places.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's difficult, obviously, in light of current situations to have our programs run as usual, but in light of COVID too, how has this adaptation to a virtual format impacted, the relationships with nature you see with your students? I know forest preserves in general are seeing a lot more use as families are looking for something to do that's safe, that's not just being inside their houses anymore. Have you heard from any constituents that they're using, you know, getting outside as another tool, or you getting outside more frequently now as a tool to kind of navigate COVID-19?
Is that an open?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know
Anybody.
for the community I serve, we've been noticing, not only just as a community member, but a lot of individuals, since we're relying on technology so much to take care of our employment, school necessities, and, you know, communicating with others. A lot of parents have been looking for other options as far as bike riding, you know, kayaks, different things that that gets them outside of the house. And I think more individuals are pushing for blank time without technology. And one of those ways that they're filling that gap is by utilizing the nature within their community.
I think that the requirement of being creative in light of the COVID has been a good thing in terms of making the connections. Our program will be virtual for the first time. This is actually only the second year of the program, but it has required organizations, people, all of us to be more creative and to discover some things that we otherwise would not have discovered had we not been pushed to do it. So to provide other options and opportunities, and even value the virtual aspect of connecting with nature through websites, videos, all those kinds of things. So I think that it has been a both and proposition, which I believe is sustainable and a good resource that we have been pushed into really embracing. So the both and proposition, but appreciating getting out has increased because of the requirement to stay in. So I think it's been a good opportunity for us to be creative and flexible.
Yeah, to echo what Ms. Deborah was saying, I believe there's a song that says you don't miss your water so your well runs dry. And I think what has happened is sometimes we do take being outdoors for granted until we realize we can't be outdoors. So for me, as a volunteer at CLE, Cool Learning, I was looking at, well, what could we do to bring outside inside? And so we did a couple different things. Of course, our virtual field trips were one way to have the students navigate digitally what would be the outdoors. And we're looking forward to perhaps Brushwood having that experience with the older children having that experience with Brushwood later on this week. What we also did what was called a nature journal. And so if you look, it's about 50 or more pictures. Like these are, you know, tracks, so the kids could do like tracking guides. And then they have flowers, so it's flora, fauna, all kinds of insects. And this is an opportunity for children to just do free write. It doesn't have to be a prompt, but this is a way that also it can be a kind of a virtual sit spot. So we're all together, but we all know to turn to the page that has the hidden label. And, you know, we can even do a class poem where you write a line, I write a line. So we do have that connection, the integration of the academic aspect with the nature aspect. And then we have a little nature scorecard. So students get 5 points for every hour they spend outdoors. And they get, of course, team points for working collaboratively and other social emotional learning skill sets in their toolkit, practicing them. And what happens is every Friday they get to shop from the CLE exchange. So we have a little store. It's like the treasure chest you have in your classroom, and they get to buy, you know, they get to buy something either for themselves or for a family member. So we try to incentivize going outside because there are some students who got really accustomed to being indoors. I don't want to use the word lazy, but lazy. And so we're trying to get them to, you know, almost reintroduce them to nature and to build their outdoor stamina. So we're trying to incentivize it through the point system because we know it's not necessarily intrinsic in some of our children. And our children are both here and in Ohio. So we have, we're across the Midwest now for the virtual experience. That's been one of the gifts of the virtual experience.
And if I can add as well, that I also think this has provided the wonderful opportunity for us to pay attention that outside is everywhere.
Yes.
Because so often we talk about getting outside and it's connected to those things that are conservation oriented or stewardship oriented. But when you walk out your door, you're outside. And so really attending to what we already have access to and valuing it in a different manner. I think this has also helped us to say, you know what, I go outside and I see this, I experience this. I don't have to go anywhere but outside my door. And paying attention to what is always there. You don't have to take a field trip. It's right outside your door, and really valuing that as well.
Absolutely. It's really incredible to hear everything that Celia is doing, and Deborah, what a wonderful point too, that we really do appreciate the nature all around us and the beauty of just getting to go out into the open air, even if that's just to walk down your block. That's still a huge opportunity to reap the benefits of nature and spending time outdoors, especially in light of a global pandemic. I do want to start to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit more about partnerships as well. And I feel like COVID-19 has also provided a really unique opportunity to lean on the partnerships we've built to help adapt to this kind of new system we're all trying to navigate, of this virtual programs, this, the Zoom fatigue that can come with constantly being online. So I kind of just want to start though at a more basic level of what partnership means to you and your organization, because without that framework, it's kind of harder to understand how we've built the partnerships we've all built, right? I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to answer that first, but I can pick names.
I know for me personally, I rely a lot on partnerships just because I am part of a government agency and a lot of our funding is accounted for before we ever receive it. And especially in my job is I'm a mental health provider, so a lot of my focus is going to be going towards providing treatment. So being able to partnership with not only Brushwood, but other organizations within the community that allow us to explore different creative aspects within treatment, and with them being willing to front the cost, that way they're ensuring that our community members have the ability to engage in different experiences, really helps us out a lot. Like I said, without those abilities of being able to work with the other communities, it really limits the treatment that we're able to provide to our children.
Wow.
Partnership for me in the way of operation exceeds being transactional, that there has to be an aspect of win-win, especially within the communities. That if I'm just reaching out to you to help me accomplish my goals, I don't see that as a partnership. I see that as an association, which is important too. But when there is a partnership, there is a welcoming of what's important to you and what's important to me, and how we can support one another with those things that are important to our communities, to our families, to our nature, to all of that. So there being a win-win proposition where the voices are welcome at the table to explore just what it is we're going to do is going to accomplish here in Markham, Illinois, contributing to the well-being of the community as a whole. So for me, and those who come in and partner with me while I'm in this space, that's what I'm looking for in terms of perception, perspective, the lens through which we look even in what we plan and how we have conversation and execute a variety of things. That's partnership for me.
Yeah, the same for us. We feel like partnerships are essential. Without our partnerships, we wouldn't be able to go to the depth, I think, that we have now with our children. I mean, our partners, we have Bodo Bog, Lake County Forest Preserve, Waukegan Park District, Big Marsh, Chicago Botanic Garden, Prairie Crossing Foundation, the Grove. Did I already say Lake County Forest Preserve? So the list goes on. So we have a number of partners that we are wonderful, I think, for us to engage with. And what they do is they kind of allow the students to take the classroom content and match it with the real world experience, right? Because they're not separated. So the teachers can have the opportunity to do some digging beforehand. So since teaching is all about connections, our students, it's a richer experience. Now, we do differentiate between partners and collaborators. So we think of collaboration as something where we build together. It involves strategy, it involves planning, usually multiple meetings, multiple emails, but we know each other's missions and we build on each other's strengths. And that's something that we have. For example, we're doing an oral history project about Lake Michigan. The students are about called Talking the Walk, about Waukegan, Lake Michigan, and the community that surrounds it. And so we have collaborated with, for several years, the Public Library, the Waukegan Historical Society, and the Waukegan Harbor Citizens Advisory Guild, the community organization that led the cleanup for the contamination of Lake Michigan, of which as citizens we all own. And so the students are kind of understanding what it is to be an empowered citizen and getting that history, learning interviews, etc. So that's a collaboration that has, that involves a lot of really strong connections. We have a wonderful collaboration with Brushwood, who has, like I said, there's a virtual field trip later on this week. There was one last week. They're going to be blessing us with a number of nature backpacks. And I think that will keep our children engaged and active for the remainder of the summer. But I think the strength of our collaborations are what has allowed us to have a really robust and vibrant experience for our children, because we already had those relationships established. So we're just kind of building on them, as we navigate the digital world.
Phenomenal. I mean, it's so wonderful to hear all the different ways in which partnerships have bolstered your work and how we've sought them out. And also, thank you so much, Kimberly. We love collaborating with you guys.
Yes, you guys are great.
In light of, how we navigate partnerships and the reasons behind our partnerships or collaboration, and especially differentiating that from what Deborah called associations, where, you might have a one-off with someone, but there's not really quite that commitment. What do you think, what kind of challenges do you think that your organization is addressing through their partnerships? And, successfully and unsuccessfully, where have partnerships failed to help address needs that they originally sought out to for your organization? It's kind of a big question.
Well, it's not that big. I can tell you one thing. Our challenge is transportation. There's an assumption, I think, in general, and outlying urban communities, Waukegan, and definitely in suburban communities, that people have reliable transportation and they're able to go and have these, enriched, do forest bathing in nature. But the reality is that that's just not the case for all of our families. I mean, I have there's an 8th grade boy that I'm thinking about, amazing, Gopher Snake. He's been with us since like 3rd or 4th grade, but the grandmother has diabetes. She doesn't drive, she's in a wheelchair. So we're able to take him the materials that he needs, but he's going to be limited. So in terms of how he can, access nature. So I think that well-meaning organizations have to understand some of the demographics of the community, and also they need to be present in our community, because it's hard to build a relationship when you're not present. It's just hard to do. I mean, it's hard enough for us to like touch each other through the screen. So imagine if you just want to just dip in and out, how people are going to be able to trust you and want to see you. And so my belief is that if you bring nature to us, we'll be more likely to go to you for nature later. And that's kind of how we feel that.
And I would like to add to Kimberly, I think understanding the demographics of the client population we serve is very important. Depending where an individual lives, there are different types of services provided. For instance, in Gurnee, which I know Kimberly is aware of, they have a lot more resources, a lot more funding, a lot more availability, where maybe transportation isn't an issue due to the family's ability of employment, versus individuals that may live in Waukegan may not have that same opportunity. And as well as being able to be personally invested in the goal. I think one of the challenges that I see is individuals from outside of the community want to come help provide support, but then they're very limited because they don't want to get too invested because they have their own personal goals. For myself, I live in this community. I grew up in this community. I vowed myself to serve this community. And if I do disjustice to the clientele I'm serving, I'm doing disjustice to, someone my son might play baseball with one day. And it's very important to make sure that we're always, have a little personal touch in the investment and the work that we're doing.
Absolutely.
The challenge and the prowess, I guess I could say, is the history of the Nature Conservancy. On both sides, it brings with it some really good things and some really challenging things. Of course, the Nature Conservancy has been around for a bit, largest not-for-profit conservation organization in the world, in all 50 states and in over 72 countries, so it's pretty big. But here where I serve, the history has been a disconnect with the community. And within the last 5 or so years, the Nature Conservancy as a whole has intentionally embraced the need to interact and engage people in a different way and better when it comes to conservation. And I reference our present diversity, equity, inclusion officer, or at least interim chief, who says without people, you don't have conservation, and how we need not eliminate, or we cannot afford to not include people if you're talking about conservation. And I appreciate her perspective, especially in her position that she has shared with us. And now that there's that intentional move towards focusing on not just the diversity environmentally or naturally or with the fauna and flowers and all of that, but the diversity includes people, the conservation includes people, and what that looks like and why. So that's been a challenge, but of course we know with the scientific lens and the leading of science, the conservation efforts of the Nature Conservancy have been absolutely tremendous. So it's a growing edge right now. And so I'm happy that it's being embraced. It's a challenge because the perspective has been conservation with the biodiversity and with the water and those things. But now we've got to figure out what this is supposed to look like and the why of it and the how of it. So I believe that on both ends of the spectrum, the challenge is history and perspective.
So beautifully put, absolutely. I think, in light especially of the recent movement against anti-Blackness and racism in this country, we're seeing a lot more nature organizations or land management organizations trying to grapple with what their place is in that conversation and how do we address the often racist history behind the land we steward, the land we conserve, so to speak. How do we acknowledge the indigenous roots of the land, the fact that we're all operating these conservation efforts on stolen land, and the communities we want to engage with, how we traditionally excluded them. Why do people not want to engage with our nature organizations now? Well, it's like you're saying, Deborah, right? It's that history. And I'm seeing a lot of, organizations, and I have seen for quite a while, a lot of organizations trying to navigate, conversations on equity and diversity and inclusion. But I know, Deborah, you led a talk on the matter for the Nature, Culture, and Human Health Network, talking about moving from that theory, that discussion, into actual practice. And what do you think more nature organizations could do to move from that conversational piece about, okay, we know that we need more diverse voices in nature, but beyond just diversity, we need actual equity. We need to create an equitable green space for all people without over-policing, without a white savior complex. But how do we move from that conversation and acknowledging those truths to actually putting those pieces into practice? And this is obviously kind of a big one, but who's ready?
Well, you referenced my talk at the end of the
I called you out,
and I was like, Which talk was that? Oh, that talk. Okay, okay.
A totally different world ago.
I think if we stop thinking organizationally, because individuals make up organizations. So what is intrinsic in people contributes to what the organization purports, and the other way around. I mean, it's a both and proposition, but the attitudes of individuals and how we present what we're trying to foster is just as important as what dynamics or what things the organization says it values. So you can say one thing, but then walking it out comes in the people. So what I bring to the table is more than just my title, more than just my name. What I bring to the table is my whole self and how that contributes to what I'm trying to do. So I think that if we acknowledge some things, we also acknowledge we need tooling in terms of how we are to do this, and take it upon ourselves as individuals and not just looking for the organization to do it, it won't happen. And history is all in the fibers of it all. So we cannot say, you can't turn the blind eye and think that there's anything that's going to change. So if we deal with people as human beings, and of course, the least of these, if you deal with quote unquote who's seen as the least of these, everybody else is going to benefit. And we know that historically, Black people have been excluded for a variety of reasons, and power doesn't want to share power, usually. But it all depends on one's perspective and one's way of operation. That translates into the organization as well.
Absolutely.
I think also that there needs to be a recognition, just Deborah's point about history, that different communities may be approaching conversations from different spaces. So for example, Diane Glaze in her book, Rooted in the Earth, talking about the history of African Americans and their connection to green spaces, she talks about the fact that members of the white community are often concerned with conservation, whereas members of the Black community are more concerned with preservation. And so we approach it kind of from two different angles. Doesn't mean we won't get, we won't run, to a corner and touch at some point. I think we have to recognize that there is a difference in perspective, and because it's like, okay, that's great, that's a wonderful green space that's untouched and conserved, but at the same time, we have to understand that those are spaces that we want to use, and that our children who may have a dearth of spaces should have access to them. So I think that there has to be a really open and honest conversations. And I think those kind of conversations oftentimes make people uncomfortable. And so they're not even broached. And it does a disservice to both, I think, to both parties when we don't have those kind of crucial conversations. I think that at this point in the nation, there's a lot of effective lip service that's being given to the issues around race and equity. And I think that many of them haven't shifted past symbolism to substance, and from protest to policy. But I think that there is a window to have the conversation, and it may be a very short window, because already the narrative has shifted into, white people not realizing the issue, when we're like, it's not about you, it's really about, about us. So I think that, we want to capitalize on the relevancy of the moment and start to broach those subjects with people who care.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, you guys, for sharing. Jonathan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, it's very hard to follow up from that. So thank you, ladies.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a couple people mentioning too, the book you mentioned, Kimberly, it was Rooted in the Earth by Diane Grace, you said? Okay.
Diane Glaze, D-I-N-N-E GLAVES, Rooted in the Earth. Another excellent one is White Spaces, Black Faces by Carolyn Finney, as you well know, right? I think she was one of the people that was going to be addressing at some point something that we're connected with. She went from California, I think now she's at UK, but she also talks about what Deborah referenced to earlier, the hesitation many times for Black Americans historically through the racialized terror, domestic terror that was committed against us from spending time in nature, particularly alone in nature, because of course it's much easier to be lynched when you are by yourself. So those are the historical realities that we need to be able to digest before we can ever break bread together.
Symbolism is so very important because with the history, as Kimberly mentioned, if we talk about history of Blacks in America, a tree can represent something else. Water can represent something else. So just being aware of that and knowing how to engage it without being patronizing, without being exclusionary, but to recognize it and be able to engage it properly.
Absolutely. Wow, this has been a very powerful words from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing this. As I said, you know, there's a lot of organizations right now navigating this complex history and trying to grapple with it, and it is going to be a lot more work before, you know, people fully understand the depth of the consequences of this history and how it affects our ability to partner now. The other thing I wanted to touch on too before I'll give us some time to do a Q&A, about 15 minutes. So I just want to touch on one more of our questions going forward. A lot of times when I hear people talking about, especially people coming from the environmental background who maybe, like Deborah pointed out, think about the environment and then people as an afterthought a little bit, just because of the way the environmental world is built in a sense, and ecological education focuses so heavily on that diversity of flora and fauna before talking about the people that actually conserve it. I often hear groups talking about what they can bring to partnerships, what they can provide communities with, what nature can do for others. But I want to know, not coming from that lens of what a community might be lacking, what are the community assets you see that you work with that you think nature organizations miss out on sometimes when they approach you for partnership, or when they try and engage with your organization? What are the assets they gloss over that you think deserve a lot more time and deference? Deborah, I saw your eyes light up.
L, okay. Wow, I think that the organizations forget that they aren't the only ones with knowledge and ideas and experience. And so we come into a community or to an environment as the expert or as the teacher and forget that there's something very valuable in being the student and necessary in being the student, because we have a variety, a treasure trove of people who have capacity to bring information, get information, share information, and accomplish a variety of goals. Yep, I think that's a missed opportunity too often.
Absolutely. Kimberly?
So for my group, I think they have a tendency to see us as one-dimensional. And so although one of our core values is celebrating nature, the other one is supporting families, building community, inspiring well-being, educating children. And then one of the ones that we're really proud of is championing futures. So we do career readiness for our students. And that's exposing them, because we realize we have to deal with the whole child. They don't live their whole life in nature, right? We have to do the reality. And so part of that is providing academic support that is integrated into our nature-based summer experience, but also we provided distance learning support for our students with the early school closures. with pairing TAs, our old teacher assistants with students, particularly necessary for students whose first language is not, parents' first language is not English, and you're sending them home, a first grader home with a homework packet, or a fifth grader home, or you have your kid to do chemistry. Who remembers high school chemistry? Not I. So we were able to support our students that way, but more important, you know, in terms of what Deborah said, is that we see our community as a cultural resource. So right now with our oral history project, Talking the Walk, last week the students interviewed their state rep, Rita Mayfield. Tomorrow they interview the Lake County Forest Preserve Commissioner, Angelo Kyle. And next week they're interviewing their mayor. So they are seeing themselves and understanding the richness, the rich tapestry of this community that oftentimes is not looked at in a very favorable light. So they're feeling good. We want them to feel good about the community in which they hail, and to go forth also being empowered to take that community to the next level. So we try and look at this, the challenges that we have really as opportunities, and to be innovative and to be encouraging, so our students know that they can be agents of change. And I think that that gets lost when we're just looked at, when people approach us just from the vantage point of nature, when we're so much more than that.
To kind of piggyback, I feel a lot of times when people approach organizations, they have their own vision in mind, like Deborah was saying. Kind of they already planned out how the system's going to work, and they need you to that little piece to the puzzle, without understanding that, you know, other organizations partnership too, and other organizations network with other things and have different skills, and being able to kind of see what can everyone bring, and being able to meet at the round table. You know, and then one thing for our organization in particular, we focus on mental health, and mental health is really our mission statement. But, you know, it took the partnership with Brushwood to really understand that these are two identities that can work together to really help over everyone's overall mission, which is help the youth, help, you know, take away those de-stressors. For example, one of our visits at Brushwood, we went on a walk, and Danny says, "Hey, can we just stop here for 10 seconds?" And everyone just stopped talking for a minute. And after those 10 seconds, she was able to say, "What did we hear?" You know, we heard birds, we heard the winds, we heard tree brushes. You know, one said he heard a leaf fall. We weren't sure if that was true or not. It was midsummer. But that goes into what we call mindfulness, and grounding ourselves, and being able to work with the, you know, those are skills that we teach in a therapy room with no windows, with poster boards, and being able to see that, you know, another organization has these strong tools that they can go with each other and put them in the environment that they need in order to learn all these different skills works. And, you know, from there, we were able to learn that my program works at another department that does Toys for Tots. And how could Danny help out for Toys for Tots in Brushwood? And, you know, Mother's Trust, who we partner with. You know, I think it's really being able to go to an organization and say, "Hey, who do you partner with? Who do you hang out with?" That way, you guys can work towards that overall large goal.
When the person who said they heard the leaf fall, they're perfect for oral history. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's pretty poetic too, isn't it, to say you heard a leaf fall? I think
Exactly.
that's kind of a great poem. So
That's a
we're gonna
novel
encourage
read.
that. We encourage all sorts of creative interpretations of nature sounds. So hey. Well, thank you guys for answering my questions. I know I kind of jumped around and changed the questions I originally sent you a little bit to adapt to our ever-changing universe right now, where it seems 1 month takes like 3 years. But 1 day feels like 2 seconds. But I do want to open up a bit to any questions from our audience. And I also want to give everyone a chance too to plug any of their programs they didn't get to talk about, or to expound on any particulars of your organization you wanted to share. So really quick, I think people have sorted this out. Some folks were asking again, Kimberly, about the books you mentioned. That I think we had Black Faces, White Spaces by Carolyn Finney. And then the other book by Diane Glave, Rooted in the Earth. Yeah, both those books. There we go.
That's
And
correct.
perfect. And then I have a couple questions already for Deborah. One question comes from Jeff. Markham Prairie is a natural area located near a mobile home park, but there is no easy access. How can local residents connect with this stunning prairie?
One of the areas of focus right now is the accessibility, because whereas there is a trail over there, the awareness of it, the upkeep of it, all of that, those things we are actually trying to deal with now. The office is located at Paintbrush Prairie, and we're kind of using that as a pilot process, because remember, there has not been a lot of connection to be sure the community feels welcomed into the space. So having the trail, also having it being a welcomed place for people to access is something we're working with now, because there is an area over there where you can walk on the, near the prairie. But one of the aspects of the conservation is being sure that the ecological value of what's there is respected, because it's a both and proposition of seeing it, experiencing, and also getting into it as much as you can, but in an ordered way that everything that needs to be preserved is preserved as much as possible. So we're working on that, and thanks for asking. And excuse me, we're working to make that a more real aspect of what we do over here. Slowly but surely. This is my second year in this position, because they didn't even have one prior to my being. Yeah,
Interesting.
I came on as the outreach coordinator, I think is what the name of it was, but there was no person that directly connected with the community. So we're working on it.
You're doing amazing work.
Thanks.
This is our conversation about partnerships, right? We have somebody who already wants to partner with you, Deborah. So.
Yay! Well, are you going to be putting our email addresses up before we leave? So feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, I hadn't planned to. If you guys wouldn't mind dropping your contact info in the chat so that folks can have a way of getting in touch with you if you want to. So if anyone's interested in reaching out to our individual panelists, I'll have them drop their email handles in the chat here so you can find them there. You could also probably Google our names and find us now. Isn't that how everything works? Is there any other questions for our panelists?
Not Googleable. I tried to stay under the radar. Can I mention one thing? We're going.
Yes, please.
So those of you who are interested, lovers of history, lovers of Waukegan, or lovers of children, and the infinite ways that they can be creative, we are having a fundraising opportunity at donorvest.com, and I'll put this in the chat. They are raising money for oral history is expensive, and we want every child to have a little oral history toolkit where they go and they do their interviews once we can do interviews live again. So I'm going to put this in the chat. There's information about it. You just go under projects, and ours would be community service. And that's just a way, if you or your friends or people who might want to support the program, because we're a nonprofit and we're very affordable. We're $150 for 8 weeks of child care with certified teachers or teachers on a teacher track. And professional poets come in. We have professional museums that come in every week, musicians, excuse me. And we have, we do improv, geography. So I love volunteering here. I can't say enough about it. So thank you for giving us the time and space. But I had to do a commercial.
Please. Oh my gosh. All of the incredible work all of you are doing deserves its own hour-long commercial. Even then.
Can I follow suit?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Well, you mentioned the Youth Environmental Thinkers program that we're doing.
Yes.
And because of all of the challenges that COVID and all that has brought, we have not even gotten started yet. However, before the end of the month, we will be getting out the information and the applications for young people 16 to 18 to apply, and it will be from August to December. So it's going to be crafted in such a way where they can still experience the program and nature and people and all of that virtually, even while they're in school. So it's an endeavor that's going to be exciting. But if you want more information about it, or you have a young person who might be interested, we mainly focus on the Markham area and the surrounding communities. But with it being virtual, who knows? Because we'll be having folk that are presenting from other countries too. So, yeah.
That is one of the plus sides of virtual programming, right? You can expand your outreach beyond what you originally imagined. Like with CLE having students in Ohio, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I did have another question come in for Jonathan. How do you think therapy or mental health treatment can be improved utilizing nature and green spaces?
Like I said, I think one of the biggest opportunities we had was being able to set up a different type of environment for individuals. When we talk, for instance, when we talk about individuals who may have anger or hypertension, being in a louded, crowded area is a lot harder for them to be able to gain those coping skills and being able to regulate themselves. But being able to put them in nature, and like the example I mentioned with Danny, with being able to put them in a place and, hey, let's listen to nature for a moment, is something that just automatically allows their body to self-regulate. At the same time, with children specifically, we look at more hands-on approaches. Talk therapy doesn't work for individuals probably under 12. So being able to be outdoors and utilizing nature. And one example we do is with nature and as well as farming is we take our youth to different local farms and work on, how can working on a farm or how can being able to care for another individual without using communication, verbal communication, a way to help them regulate and being able to do that themselves. We talk about when someone's upset, it's easy to say calm down, but that's not always approachable. So I think it's more getting creative and seeing different ways that works. I know what Danny, one thing we have done is, hey, this is what I kind of want to do. How can you kind of help with this? And she's like, oh yeah, we got this. We can make this happen. One thing we made was we made journals, and in different ones they had text journals on there. Sensory is really big with mental health, especially when we talk about individuals with autism, individuals that need help with regulating. Being able to provide, nature, just a pine cone, being able to rub your finger around the pine cone, but is just a sensory thing that helps them regulate. We talk about stress balls, and everyone needs to buy balloons and powder. I was like, or you can just go and feel a leaf real quick. Nature has really helped our program a lot, and it's something that I think we all kind of knew, and being able to work with Danny has really kind of allowed that. So I hope that kind of answered the question.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm going to plug something for us super fast, if that's okay. Brushwood Center is doing a virtual version of our Smith Nature Symposium this year. So if you want to see Kimberly and her students present on their projects, keep an eye out on the Brushwood Center website, as well as our Facebook page for announcements as to the dates and signing up for our sessions. We'll have several conversations about environmental solutions in light of our changing world and how we can reopen more responsibly and more ethically and equitably and change.
Danny, for that public service announcement, we want to share with them that Bill McKibben, the rock star of the environmental movement.
I was getting to that. It'll
Our children will be able to be presenting their sustainable artwork and their poems to His Majesty and asking him questions. So they're so excited, they can hardly sit still.
Yes, on October 2nd, we'll have our final live streamed talk with Bill McKibben and Sue Halpern. I'm so excited to see what the CLE students ask of these huge environmental thinkers, but I know that they are the next generation of huge environmental thinkers. So they're gonna take them to task, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. They don't hold back.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining me on this virtual version of our conversation. And thank you so much to Chicago Wilderness for finding a way to adapt this Congress and letting us just kind of get up here and have a conversation without a formal presentation. We appreciate it. And also, thank you to the sponsors of this Congress as well. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely.